Hello, everyone. This is a Call to Actions Radio, a new genre in radio, results-based radio. Today is December 7th, 2014. Our subject today is Stop Covert Depopulation Tour. Our hosts are myself, Kimberlee Schultz, Eugene Irvin, and Bobby Lee Vaughn Jr. Our guest, welcome back, Kevin Mugur Galalae. A lot has happened since our last interview in February 17th of this year. Can you give us a little feedback on kind of where we started, where we are now, and where we're going? Welcome, Kevin, back to the show.
Well, thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be back and to address my American audience again. Well, yes, a lot has happened since the hunger strike, which ended on June 3rd in Rome. So, first of all, I needed about a week or two to recover physically, and somebody in the south of Germany was very kind to give me a pristine place to recover. Took very, very good care of me, and then I headed to a little further up north, still in Germany, to my family. Luckily, I have family here, and they welcomed me with open arms, and they provided me with the most incredible conditions to work. So I have been working nonstop since then with great results, and I've been extraordinarily prolific. Published 2 books and have addressed already 140 heads of state and researched 140 nations. To uncover and to reveal to the public at large how each and every nation has proceeded, since when, by what covert depopulation methods, and why, and under what jurisdiction, and under the coordination of which national agency, and so on. And these letters, even though they're very compact, are very revealing because they provide statistical, demographic, political data that is very accurate and up to date. And I must say that over the last month or two, especially, I have noticed a great increase of very, very important publications that are, in my opinion, I think they're being leaked from the United Nations system. And I don't know if this has anything to do with my direct appeal to the people within the UN system to start acting as whistleblowers and to start leaking material. If that is the case, then I want to thank the people within the UN system who are providing all this material, and the people also from various national organizations and institutions and intelligence services, because I'm sure that they have a lot to say on this subject too. In any case, I have everything I need now, all of the material and all of the data I need to prove beyond any doubt whatsoever how, why, since when each and every country on Earth has started to subvert human fertility, and so it has, since when they have started their own population control program. And because this material is so relevant and indisputable, and because my letters are based on publications and raw data that is generated by the very organizations that I'm attacking, in a sense, because they are in control of this program at the international level. The organizations like the United Nations Population Fund and the World Health Organization, and UNICEF, and a whole bunch of others, they can't dispute the facts. So they have completely shut up. There's absolutely no opposition now to any of my publications online. They have the people in the system have completely retreated in a shell. They realize that the entire secret is out. They can no longer accuse me or anybody else of being a conspiracy theorist. Not that they've ever done it. And they've lost the battle. We've won the information war, and now it's just a matter of spreading the news.
You definitely got the ball rolling. As we're aware, there are various methods of depopulation, different techniques involved in different sectors that are state and government funded. Would you like to go into details about the different techniques and methods of depopulation?
Yes, basically there are 2 broad categories. One, that methods that are meant to subvert human fertility, and other methods that are meant to subvert or undermine the family structure. Both of them, of course, having the same end result: smaller families and fewer children. And that's exactly what the system needs. They need to force every country to below replacement level or a replacement level. That is 2 children per woman and no more, because that is what it takes to have a stable population. So in terms of methods meant to undermine human fertility, we have chemical, biological, and bacteriological methods. Among the chemical methods is the use of endocrine disruptors, substances, toxins that are deliberately inserted in food, water, and beverages to undermine human fertility. So the primary ones are fluoride, BPA, that's bisphenol A plastics, and also artificial sweeteners. And of course, fluoride can be delivered in 3 different ways: either by fluoridating the tap water, and in this category, about 800 million people are affected. Then you have fluoride in the salt. That's the preferred method for middle-income countries who cannot afford, but their governments cannot afford to pay for poisoning people's systems. So they force people themselves to pay for their own poison. So when people go to the store and buy salt, fluoridated salt, and they use that in cooking, they have also paid for their own fertilizer or sterilizer. Sorry. So this is why fluoridated salt is the preferred method of fertility depression or infertility throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, some Eastern European countries, and a couple of Asian countries as well. And the third way, the least popular way for fluoride poisoning is through milk. That's a little bit more expensive. It usually targets children in school, so it's very, very nasty. Thailand engages in that. Bulgaria did, parts of Russia. But generally speaking, that is a method that is now sort of being abandoned little by little. And BPA, the other chemical sterilizer, the BPA plastics or bisphenol A, short BPA, it's ubiquitous now throughout the world, because they're packaging everything in this BPA plastic. They're putting all of the beverages in plastic bottles made of BPA. And BPA or bisphenol A is a sterilizer that is as potent as fluoride. And it is delivered to the consumers through the packaging. So the BPA leaches into the food or the beverage, and that is how we ingest it. And that is particularly practical, if you want, for countries that are warm, because the warmer the bottle gets in which this particular beverage is held, the warmer it gets, the more BPA leaches into it. So you can imagine that the countries that are warm, tropical, in other words, most of the countries in the developing world, their people are going to be poisoned with BPA far more than the people in the West, where the bottles are usually refrigerated and the climate is cooler anyway. And the third one, the artificial sweeteners, they put that in just about everything nowadays, so it's very hard to escape that. If you, for instance, consume any kind of processed food or drink a lot of pop. Now, in terms of biological methods, vaccines that have been adulterated to have a double effect. Let's say they have an immunization program for meningitis, for all kinds of say meningitis or tetanus or malaria, and they use these vaccination programs for a double purpose. Yes, they may provide immunity for a particular illness, but at the same time they insert in these vaccines a sterilizing agent that provides at least temporary sterilization to the recipients. And 3 of them are very popular because they need to target not children, not young infants, but rather either young adults or children just as they enter puberty, and their excuse me, and their reproductive systems become active and functional. So this is why they every time that the government or the United Nations system comes with a free vaccine, let's say for a meningococcal vaccine, which targets young people age 12 to 14, or tetanus toxoid vaccine, which targets women, pregnant women, and mothers, and also let's say the malaria vaccine that is being developed now, or malaria drugs based on artemisinin, which is a known sterilizer. That the purpose behind that vaccine is not so much to lend immunity to these people for these diseases, even though that is also a byproduct, but primarily because they need to sterilize the population in order to halt the population explosion, especially in the developing world. So the illnesses like malaria are very, very helpful to the depopulation lobby, because they have an excuse to target the entire population. Malaria is endemic to these tropical and subtropical areas. So they have a chance to get to people of all ages. Whereas with the immunization programs designed for children, they can't reach the young people just before puberty or during puberty, and the young adults and the young mothers. This is why people have to watch the meningococcal vaccines, the tetanus toxoid vaccines, and the human papillomavirus vaccines. Those three, you can bet money on it that they are also sterilizing vaccines. So that's the one of the biological methods. And the second biological method, which is the newest weapon in the arsenal of depopulation, is of course GMOs, and genetically modified foods or organisms. And these are being shoved down our throats in the developed and the developing world. The only stalwart that has refused, to accept this new sterilization method is Europe. And but in North America, though the battle is lost, you find GMO products or GMO foods in just about everything you buy, and of course it's not labeled. And the depopulation lobby prevents any kind of labeling, because they know once it is labeled, people will refuse to buy any product that contains GMOs. As simple as that. Nobody in their right mind will buy GMOs, because GMOs were developed specifically to sterilize the population, period. There are absolutely no other benefits from GMOs to be had. And GMOs are being now pushed onto Africa, even though, obviously it makes absolutely no sense to push GMOs onto Africa. What Africa needs is to develop its arable land, to put the people to work, to organize properly, to have a proper governance. That's what they need. They don't need GMOs. They have plenty of land. Africa alone can feed 2 or 3 times the population that it has, because it is very, very fertile. So GMOs are the newest weapon of depopulation, pure and simple. Now, in terms of methods that are aimed at subverting the family structure or undermining the family structure, you have all kinds of psychosocial and now economic methods, of course, as well. Among the psychosocial methods, you have, the media manipulation to, for instance, let me actually start with the UN's favorite method, which is promoting women into the workforce. So, in developing societies, the women mostly stay at home. It's the men who work outside the house. The women are homemakers and take care of the kids, the household, and so on. So in this category, we have about 2 billion women across the world. That's 2 billion. And the UN is trying to promote women education, which is not a bad thing at all. I'm all for it. But they're also trying to push these women into the workforce so that they once they are in the economy and they have to compete for jobs and fulfill, the requirements of employers, they will have less time to dedicate to the home and to children, and therefore they will have fewer children. And another method is to keep people as long in school as possible. So we see now in the developed world, it has become ridiculous now. Nobody can get a job, basically a decent job, a decently paying job that can sustain a family unless you've gotten a master's degree and perhaps a PhD. Whereas in the developing world, now they started at a lower level, so now they demand 12 years of education, school education, from everybody, and slowly they will increase the requirements there too, in order to postpone entry into the workforce for both men and women, to keep men and women in school or young people in school long enough so they don't get pregnant and they don't get into trouble and start families early on. So they delay the time when people can start families, and they delay the time when people can enter the workforce and have enough money, earn enough money to be able to sustain families. And in this respect, it's very interesting to compare data from today with 50 years ago when this engineered society began. And today, the average time when women start having children, when they have their first children, is 10 to 15 years later than in 1950 or prior to 1950. So to this kind of social engineering, they've shaved off 15 years from the reproductive period of human beings in Western societies. And of course now the developing world is catching up, in this respect too. So this is really an elegant method to approach population control. And given the choices and given the fact that we have to have population control, since the planet cannot sustain an increase of people ad infinitum without any kind of restrictions. These methods, these psychosocial methods, are better, obviously, far better than the covert chemical and biological methods, which actually poison our systems and sicken us and degrade the genetic and intellectual endowment of the species. And of course, the last one is economic. Of course, they have two different methods for the developed and the developing world. In the developed world, they basically destroy the social systems. They deprive the state of money through these banking system where it's the banks who are in charge of dictating the economic and monetary conditions, and the state has to borrow from the banks. And the moment a dollar or a euro is put onto the market, at that moment, that dollar or that euro begins to produce debt. So they've indebted all of the Western societies in a very artificial way, all of the developed world in an artificial way, in order to constrain the ability of the state to provide, comfortable social systems and proper wages for the population. Because if people have a lot of money to spend and they live comfortably, they will have more children, they will have larger families, they will consume more. And right now, the entire effort of the international community is not only to ensure that the families stay below replacement level, but also that we decarbonize the economy. So they want us to have less money in order to consume less, and therefore have a smaller ecological footprint per capita on the environment. So that's another reason why they're tightening the reins. They're lowering our wages. They're starving us of any kind of income and spending power. And in the developing world, they've approached this differently. They through loans from international organizations like the World Bank and the IMF, they force developing nations to go into debt. They become dependent, and then they have to sell all their state assets. The state assets are passed into the hands of corporations. The nations and the people lose control over their own resources. the corporations, international corporations, get in there and they seize control of these. They seize control of these assets, and then they can basically dictate, how many people will thrive and how many people will be excluded from economic well-being, and that's what is happening.
Wow, very pointed agenda we got there. I wanted also to cover in your recent writing on the Holy Grail controlling human life on the planet, you touched base on the use of fluoridation and how it attacks the pineal gland.
Yes.
You want to touch base on that real quick?
Yes, and that's very, very interesting because it has so many implications. Of course, fluoride damages the entire endocrine system, and the endocrine system regulates, every function in the body. And this is why we have all these illnesses, these terrible illnesses, from the so-called illnesses of affluence, like obesity and heart disease and diabetes, to neurological illnesses, to developmental illnesses. But one of the interesting things is that indeed fluoride, especially when the population is chronically poisoned with fluoride over multiple generations, it calcifies the pineal gland, and the pineal gland is considered to be the eye of the soul, the organ, if you want, through which we communicate with the divine. It gives us, this insight, this special connection, if you want, with things that we cannot explain, because it is at the very heart of the brain. It is at the very center of the brain. The fact that it is at the very center of the brain indicates just how important the pineal gland is. And of course, all Westerners and all people who have been subjected to fluoridation, whether it is water fluoridation or salt fluoridation or milk or fluoridation through the dental programs, like people in the Northern Europe, they have calcified pineal glands, and this is why religion is dead. Any kind of spiritual connection to God or to the things that we cannot explain has completely disappeared, has been eradicated, has been physiologically eradicated from Caucasians. Why? Because our pineal glands are calcified. So we no longer have the organ necessary to communicate with God. And because we don't have the organs to communicate with God, we are as blind to this dimension as a person without eyes would be blind to the world. And the fact that that religious organizations have approved this program of covert depopulation, and in fact they are to a great extent responsible for why secular governments have had to go underground to tackle the overpopulation problem through covert means, is because of resistance from religious organizations, especially the Catholic Church, who at least openly they until 1969 they put up a good fight, and they did not want to allow the United Nations or any kind of government to subvert people's fertility. And they wanted people to just exercise self-control and use natural methods of restricting the number of children and deciding when to get pregnant. But that doesn't work so well. So because the church has opposed the use of contraceptives as an unnatural way of limiting family size, and also they've refused to accept abortion. And by the way, I'm fully on the side of the Catholic Church on this issue, because I would never dream of asking the Pope or any religious person, for that matter, non-religious people, to abort. I find the whole thing, disgusting. But sometimes there is a need for it, and it should be done. But it should be left in the hands of mothers and fathers. The state has no business there. Religious authorities have no business. That's only parents can decide that. In any case, there's no reason why religious authorities should not approve the use of contraceptives, but nevertheless they have not approved the use of contraceptives. So secular authorities and the United Nations have had to go underground, and they have because they could not encourage the use of contraceptives, they were forced to do the only remaining thing, and that is to subvert people's fertility so that they prevent the moment of conception. And how do you do that without being in people's bedrooms? Well, you can only do it through the basic elements of life: water, food. That's it. And that's exactly what they have done. And that's why they have fluoridated the water. So indirectly, the religious authorities have subverted the very spirituality of the Caucasian race, and now gradually of everybody else who, because all of the other nations have come in later into the fluoridation program and the depopulation program. So this is why we see that Westerners are so non-religious now, and why, for instance, in countries throughout Europe, you have increasingly a majority of either atheists or agnostics, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But what I'm saying is that this is a physiological response to the fact that our pineal glands have been calcified through fluoride.
Isn't it interesting also that the largest representation of a pine cone, which of course the pineal gland is named for, is in fact at the Vatican? And for anybody who may not be familiar with your work, and certainly for those who are, do you want to touch on some of the statements that were released at the time of your visit there? Of course, still being unofficially acknowledged. You weren't really acknowledged by the Vatican themselves officially. However, the statements that came out from the Pope really seemed to kind of mirror your presence there. And I thought maybe you'd like to talk about that for us for a little bit.
Yes, I have to say that despite any kind of open statement or direct statement from the Church to the effect that acknowledging my work, the fact that they have not been issued openly does not detract from the fact that what the Church has done behind the scenes has been extraordinary. They have acted, the Vatican and the Catholic Church in general has acted faster and deeper and more meaningfully than any other organization. So they've proven what they've proven to me, and I'm amazed, by the way, because I consider myself agnostic. And by the way, I'm not Catholic, in case people think I'm Catholic. Many have called me a priest for some reason, perhaps because I use religious language often, and I love religious language, and I'm a spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person. But the Church, to get back to the point, the Church has acted faster than any organization, faster than the United Nations, faster than any government on earth. And what have they done? The very first time I approached them is when I finished the book, Chemical and Biological Depopulation, which in its first issue was called Water, Salt, Milk, Killing Our Unborn Children. And I wrote that book while in exile in the United States. Many of the listeners, or some of the listeners, may know that I had to leave my country, Canada, clandestinely to escape a fifth arrest. I've been arrested 6 times. I've been imprisoned 6 times. And this was, I escaped the fifth arrest, and I made my way to Canada. And that's another story. I made my way to the United States. And while in the United States in 2012, I wrote this book. That's when it first dawned on me how everything fitted together, and that there was a depopulation program and why. And within 2 months, I wrote the first book. And the first recipients of my book, before I published it online, before I sent it to anybody else, I sent it to the Vatican. Why? Because I knew that the Vatican, at least openly, they have always been against the state subverting human fertility and attacking the family. They've always protected the family, the notion of the family unit. They've always opposed, abortion and so on. So I thought I had a natural ally there who will immediately jump to my defense and publicize my book and will make this known. Of course, while they did not do anything publicly, not even acknowledge receipt of my book, they have immediately acted behind the scenes. We have a new pope now, and the fact that we have a new pope, this is no coincidence. It is no coincidence that this pope is a Jesuit. It is no coincidence that this pope is a South American, and it is no coincidence that this pope is not infected, if you want, or infected by the previous popes who were fully involved in the depopulation program and who have had a direct hand in allowing secular governments to proceed through covert means. So the church immediately changed its leadership in order to protect, if you want, the church, and to limit the consequences, because now another reaction of the church while I was in Rome on hunger strike, and 2 days after I gave the Pope my second book, Killing Us Softly, the Global Depopulation Policy, which I delivered, in person to the Vatican, and 2 or 3 days later, he called all of the UN heads of state, heads of organizations, all all of the people from the UN system, called them to the Vatican, and they had a meeting there. They didn't say much of what happened there, but they made sure that I knew that this happened, and that it was a direct response to my being there on hunger strike and appearing every day in St. Peter's Square in my white clothes and doing my daily prayer there. And then they issued, several statements. One of the statements that they issued, the papacy issued a statement saying that the church has focused too much on family issues like contraceptives and abortion, and it should just stop doing that. The second one, which is of extraordinary importance, is that they've acknowledged that the church is not infallible. Why is this important? Well, because the reason the church has not been able to change its position on prohibiting the use of contraceptives and abortion is because the church committed itself to this position early on. And due to the doctrine of papal infallibility, which dictates that when a pope commits himself to this dogma, to this position, to this teaching, no subsequent pope can change it. This is why it's infallible. The doctrine of papal infallibility. A pope, whether dead or alive, cannot be wrong. So if a present pope were to change the policy that was set by a previous pope, that would invalidate the doctrine of papal infallibility. So this is why, the church has been caught in its own net. And by the way, this doctrine of papal infallibility, which was put into place in 1870, is important to the church because the reason they put it in place in 1870 is in order to have some kind of power on earth. They lost their territories at that time to the Italian state, the newly formed Italian state, so that now they needed a different way to influence society, and by they've assumed control over moral issues. So that's why the doctrine of papal infallibility is so important for the church, because they are the ultimate authority on moral matters, on ethical matters in Christendom. Sorry, go ahead.
Do you think that that they actually know their hands are tied and are hoping people like you and letting you know, kind of in a not so out there way, keep going because we can't do what you're doing?
Yes, of course. They've in subtle and not so subtle ways they've assisted me tremendously, and I'm in communication with the church almost on a daily basis. By the way, indirect communication. And I send material to the papacy. Every time I publish an article, I also send it to the papacy, and they've always received it, and they always read it because I see it reflected afterwards in whatever they do in the statements of the Pope and so on. Just as an example, as a more recent example, towards the end of November, Pope Francis came to Strasbourg, France, where the European Parliament is and the European Court of Human Rights, and gave two very important speeches. You have to keep in mind that this is a very unusual event. The last time this happened was 26 years ago, I think it was, and Pope Paul II spoke about the fall of communism. Also, the fact that the Pope chose Strasbourg rather than Belgium or some other central power in Europe is also telling, because this is where my ordeal began in 2011 when I did my first hunger strike in order to shut down a program of surveillance and censorship, which is an offshoot of the greatest depopulation program. So the Pope is very aware of that, because early on I sent the Vatican and the secret library, secret archive, secret Vatican archive all of my material and all of my publications, and I asked them to hang on to them, and I asked them, in case I don't survive this attack on me, because I was being attacked from all directions. I was being arrested. I was kicked out of my home. My children were taken away. My house was taken away. My property was taken away. My computers were taken away. I was thrown into the street penniless. My bank accounts were closed, and I was prohibited to have access from it. I was the state imposed, draconian conditions on me. They accused me of crimes I did not commit. I mean, the attack was just brutal and was designed to completely destroy and invalidate me and discredit me. And they were hoping that I would commit suicide. I would die, and I would starve in the street. But luckily, I have a strong family and strong friends, and they all came to my defense. So anyway, my ordeal started in Strasbourg, France, and Pope Francis went to Strasbourg, France, to give these two extraordinarily important speeches. And what did he say during those speeches? One, which was addressed to the European Parliament, and the second one, which was private, was addressed to the Council of Europe. Again, the very institutions that I took to task in 2011, and that I sued, that I directed my lawsuit against England in 2011. He said to them that Europe is haggard, and Europe is infertile, and Europe cannot survive under these conditions. He used the word infertile Europe, infertile families, and that Europe needs families many, many times in his speech. And that was a direct allusion, a direct reference to everything I've been saying and I've been urging him to do, which is to force secular authorities to stop all covert depopulation methods before they kill us all. So the Pope, I can guarantee you that what he's saying in private is a lot stronger than what he's saying publicly. But now he's even saying it publicly. He's saying it publicly, and those who know what to look for can understand exactly what he's saying. People who are completely out of the loop and in the dark, like the vast majority of the population, well, that will just go above their heads like a snowflake. They will not get it. But the Pope is now putting pressure on secular authorities at the European level, at the international level, to act. And I'm hoping that people from the Vatican are listening right now. If secular authorities do not act, then I urge Pope Francis and the College of Cardinals to stop being diplomatic and to just say it as it is, to tell the public openly and clearly that our own elected governments are poisoning us, are poisoning our children. They have been poisoning us for almost 7 decades, and that the result of this poisoning, as a result of this poisoning, 1/4 of all European genetic lines have been shut down. 1/4 of all Europeans do not have children, will never have children, cannot have children because they are infertile. These genetic lines that have survived, that have thrived over millennia of evolution, have been shut down within 50 years of covert depopulation methods. If these methods continue by the next generation, 10, 15 years from now, those young kids that are now entering their reproductive years, they are going to be sterile to the tune of 50% and not 25%. Half of them are going to be sterile. And already the European population is declining, has gone into decline since 2010. The decline is being covered up by immigration. The European countries are accepting just enough immigrants to make sure that the population does not decrease. Because if it were to decrease rapidly, as it does, because the native population is already decreasing rapidly, that would be not only economically disastrous, it would also be obvious to everybody else, because the cities and the towns would start emptying out, just like it is happening in Japan. You see, Japan is a very racist society, and they don't allow any immigrants in, and they've gone into decline, into population decline in 2008, and now they're in serious trouble. This is why they have all these economic problems. This is why they have this deflationary situation that's been lasting now for 20 years, and it's going to last for another 30 years until the population stabilizes at the desired level. So
we see a pattern, Kevin. We see a pattern here of where they claim that they have this perceived problem, obviously, which means overpopulation is dangerous to a degree. because the society and the technologies are, somehow not equipped to, evolve with a growing population. But, in that name, they also can have another agenda underneath the surface where they claim that they have to do this in the name of, whatever it is. And then they offer the solution, which seems to further enslave the people they claim they're trying to protect.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't. You see a bigger agenda here going on. I think they're realizing that we're going to be way below levels of.
Well, this is the test now, Kimberlee. This is the test that they have to pass, because if they fail this test, then their lives are going to come to an end fast, because the people are going to rise up and it's going to be mayhem. This is the test now. Now we're giving them the opportunity. This is why I'm addressing them, personally, each and every head of state, each and every UN organization and subsidiary. I'm addressing them in person to tell them in no uncertain terms that we know what they're doing, that the people I'm addressing are personally responsible to act now, or else they're going to face charges for crimes against humanity and genocide, and they're going to be punished accordingly, punished severely if they're lucky to escape the wrath of the mob, if they're lucky, which is a big if. So, if they do not react now, if they do not change policy, if they do not bring this covert depopulation program out into the open, then they will have failed the test. Then that means that indeed they have diabolical intentions, and that they are hiding, more than just meets the eye behind the population problem, which is indeed a serious problem, the most serious problem that humanity faces. So this is the time for them of do or die, and I'm addressing now even people in the lesser echelons of the UN system, and giving them a chance to act. And of course, they realize now that something has to change. So this is why they're changing the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. This is supposed to happen in 2015. In July, they have a conference on financing sustainable development. In September, they have a meeting on negotiating sustainable development goals. And in December, they have the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris, France. So these three events, this is when they are going to have to declare to the world openly that population control is a problem, that in order to tackle it openly, the people need to know the facts, and people need to take responsibility, and people need to take charge, not governments, so that the poisoning can stop. So that means that between now and then, they have to somehow prepare the population for a soft landing, for a body blow news of major proportions, because you can imagine people who have no clue of what's been going on for the past 70 years, when they're going to find out for the first time that our own elected governments have been poisoning us, that they prevented the birth of 2.5 billion children, that they have sped up the death of 500 million people, that they have sickened chronically sickened upwards of a quarter of the population that started with these covert methods in 1945, 1950, that 10 to 15 to 20% of our children suffer from horrible developmental diseases, that people throughout the Western world suffer from mental disorders because we have been chronically poisoned, and on and on and on and on. All of these, consequences, direct, indirect, and unintended. All of these are going to come, all of a sudden. You can imagine what the reaction of people who have never heard such a thing is going to be. The level of disappointment and anger, and the broken trust is going to be so horrendous and so tremendous that this has to come in small pieces, little by little, to prepare the people, because to make them understand that when they started with this program in 1950, there were structural obstacles in the place, and they couldn't do it in any other way. People were not ready. Technology for birth prevention was not there. The political system could not do it because it's based on voting, and people would not vote for somebody who want to curtail family size. And then all of the religious authorities could not understand, the need for this because it was offending their moral values and the social norms and cultural norms. But now we're at a different place in history when we know, everybody knows, you don't have to be an expert to understand that we are at 7 billion now, and unless population control would not be fully engaged as it is now, we would be 14 billion in 30 years. By 2040, we would be 14 billion. There's no way we would survive this. There's no way we would survive these next 20, 30 years. Of course, they've been with their foot on the brake since 1945, 1950, and this is why the global society and global peace, international peace, has not disintegrated between then and now, which it would have. So all of these things, they have to start educating and prepping the population for it. And you can see it now. You can see it in the Hollywood movies that are coming out. The notion of population and overpopulation and poisoning the earth and polluting the earth and destroying the earth is almost in every movie that comes out now, every blockbuster movie that comes out of Hollywood. And the next step is going to be, what governments have done to combat this and how successful or unsuccessful they have been. And now, of course, in addition to the population problem, we have the pollution problem, the climate change. Whether it is as drastic as they say it is or not, that's completely irrelevant. We have pollution, and we're destroying the soils, and we're acidifying the oceans, and we're creating dead zones around the continents because we're pumping too much stuff into the ocean. And and yes, there is the CO2 accumulation. It's impossible. You don't have to be a scientist to understand that we've been pumping CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution in 1780, 1800. And these greenhouse gases have, half of them have accumulated because they have not been absorbed by the trees and the carbon sinks, the oceans, and so on. And that now we've gone over the 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere threshold, and for the first time in history, it's real. Whether they exaggerate the data or not is irrelevant. It's real. We're screwing up the entire planet, and all of us are going to be dead within 100 years because nature is becoming angrier and angrier. We have more, climate change-related events like droughts and hurricanes, and they're more excessive, more often, they're more brutal, and they're displacing more and more people. And then the drought, throughout Africa and in California now and throughout the world, the data is there, it's clear. Unless we decarbonize and depopulate, we're screwed. So that's now the focus of the entire existence of the international structure and the national structure, to depopulate and decarbonize. The decarbonization program is out in the open, the depopulation program is not. And this whole thing is not going to succeed unless they bring that out into the open and engage us all in it, and give us all an equal chance so that nobody's excluded. Right now, they're excluding 80% of the population so that they can inherit the earth. Well, we're not going to let them do that. I'm not going to let them do that. We have a right to survive, and our families have a right to survive just as much as theirs. And they're not smarter than we are.
Yeah, and that's why the whole reason we're having these conversations is, for one, we have to acknowledge what's going on that's been kept from us, these hidden agendas. And two, once we do, focus on solutions. And it seems like the people like us that know what's going on, we have to force those that are not being forthright in, saying, yes, we have been doing this. But once we acknowledge that that's been done, we need to come together and unify and figure out how we as people together collectively can be part of the solution and take this nasty agenda and put it out in transparency and come together and find out how what we need to do to survive and evolve as a humanity. And I know you covered some of that in your OM principles, and is that something that as you sit down with these 196 heads of state, and I wanted to bring that up right now because we have that GoFundMe page where we're asking the people to be part of the solution simply by contributing to getting you in front of all these 196 heads of state. And if anybody wants to go to that, I'll put that up a slide so people can see it. It's gofundme.com/E as in Edward 7K974. And that's also up on Facebook pages. And we can put all those links up so people can see where to go to contribute. How we together as people need to support this program, because obviously if they're not doing it on their own, if it wasn't for the work that you're doing, Kevin, getting this out there, I don't know where we would be going, but we have to take a stand and persevere and put this information out there. And, what I encourage people to do is to contribute to that fund and follow what's going on. Now, you said you're getting ready to publish this month the letters of all 196 heads of state, correct?
I'm publishing Volume 3 in about 3 or 4 days. Volume 3 is going to include about 56 letters to be exact. Volume 1 and 2 are already published, and that's so 110 letters are already published. This is Volume 3. It's going to be published in 3 days, and then I need another month to finish Volume 4, and I will have covered every country on Earth, all 200 of them or so. But how right you are, Kimberlee. We have to come together, just like the elites have come together, and all of our differences that separate us right now have become so completely irrelevant in the face of these brutal, huge geopolitical, geostrategic, environmental, economic scenarios that we're facing, which are absolutely disastrous unless we work together. So, whether we are Christians now, or Muslims, or Jews, or Hindus, or atheists, or capitalists, or communists, or socialists, or royalists, is completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. Nature does not give a damn what our belief system is. Nature is going to whack us right, left, and center. And nature can no longer provide for the 7 billion on Earth now, for all of our needs and wants and numbers. It cannot provide. That's why 2 billion of us are in dire straits. And that's why we see the soils destroyed, and we see famine, and we see desertification everywhere, and we see water shortages. Now, some areas, so many areas in the world are suffering such dire water shortages. Many now rely entirely in the Middle East, North Africa. They rely almost entirely on desalination plants, and that's extraordinarily expensive. Not to mention that has its own environmental problems. So we've depleted the aquifers in many areas of the world. There is not enough water for irrigation. There is not enough water coming down in the form of rain. There is not enough water for household use, for industry, for anything. And the population still keeps growing. So how in the world are we going to reach sustainable development or combat poverty and eradicate hunger, which are the worthy goals of the United Nations and the entire international community? How can you not applaud this effort to eradicate poverty, so we don't have to see people starving and children with their extended bellies, desiccated and dying in the sun? How can you not want that? I'm sick and tired of seeing that. I don't want to see that. I don't want my children to see that. I don't want that to exist on Earth, because it just weighs so heavily on all our consciences. And if there is a God out there, the God is probably wondering, what kind of assholes we are in order to tolerate this kind of conditions among our own brothers and sisters. So yes,
absolutely. I mean, these are the choices that we have made multi-generationally, and we're seeing the culmination of that. This is my opinion. But you really struck a chord with me, Kevin, on this issue, because, I see a level of compartmentalization represented in this agenda way, way up at the top, guys. And, I'd like to get your perspective on a couple of things, not the least of which would be, who is they? Basically, who are the ones that are pulling the strings back out there to get this done at the top and making these heads of state and so on, which are obviously below the banker level that are running everything with these different banks that are privatized and essentially put us in economic debt and slavery. And these are the guys that are out there that are doing this. But what is the number one solution that would kind of just break this whole thing down? Because from what I know and my experiences and just the research and what is really well known at the upper echelons up here is that free energy is a reality. And so the whole premise that we have to perpetuate a cycle of depopulation in order for us to sustain ourselves on this planet is false. That whole idea is false, but so many people believe this at the level of, at the executive branch level, certainly here in the United States and similar levels across the world. These guys are under the impression that we have to do this in order to, to sustain ourselves. This is a big issue, and I just kind of want to get your thoughts on this stuff, Kev.
Well, if we were to engage society in every nation, every man and woman on Earth to switch, as rapidly as we can from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources, which it's possible, and I've already the newest files for each of the 15 countries that have made proposals for transiting from fossil fuels to a totally renewable energy economy, or a carbon-free economy. It's possible already with today's technology. But if we were to do this transition so fast, do you know how many countries and how many people will be left without an income? Because entire economies and social groups depend entirely on the fossil fuel economy, on oil and gas extraction and carbon and coal mining and so on. You're talking about countless millions of people and countless investments that are long-term, and entire industrial sectors and economic sectors of the economy that would be put out of business overnight. So in order to do that, it's doable, but you have to also change the economic system and the social system and the way you distribute wealth in a society, and you have to do it globally. So you can imagine the preparation, the preconditions necessary for this transition from a fossil fuel economy to a carbon-free or a renewable energy economy. It is absolutely vast. And all of these organizations are so structured and so rigid, and every country has its own petty interest, and then every social economic group or social group or social class has its own interests, and nobody wants to give their turf, and they don't want anybody to piss on their turf. They want everybody else to make sacrifices, but not themselves. And you have that on an industrial level, on a social class level. You have that on a national level, and you have that even in the UN system. Why do I say that with certainty? Because I said to the UN people, you are poking your finger at the industrialists, at the oil industry for not changing fast to renewables and for not giving up, all their privileges and whatnot. But you yourselves are doing the exact same thing. You're not telling the people the truth, namely that we're not going to survive in the next 30 years without decarbonization and depopulation. And you people are in charge of the depopulation program. It's not the industrialists. It's not the people who are extracting oil and putting it on the market. They're responsible for our carbon economy and for our pollution and whatnot. We're all responsible for that. But it's you people, the UN people, and the people in the ministries of environment, ministries of health of every nation on Earth who are responsible for this covert depopulation program. And when I'm asking you to tell people the truth so that you empower people, why don't you do it? Why? Because they are defending their own turf. They are defending their own incomes. Their cozy positions with their cozy benefits and their cozy retirement plans in UN structure and all of these ministries within national governments. You see, they are just as guilty as those rich assholes who don't want to switch from a carbon economy to a renewable economy because they have these long-term investments. And they don't want to lose that money. They want to maximize their investments. So they want to continue to profit to the maximum. They don't want to abandon all these investments. So we're all guilty. And even the doctors are guilty. Let me just say this one more time. Because the depopulation program leads back to, in every country, to one coordinating agency, one responsible agency. That is the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health of every nation on Earth is responsible for poisoning the people. What a better way to hide that than, behind the Ministry of Health? Because they are hiding the poisoning depopulation program behind better maternal care, better child care, and health care and better immunization and so on. So the doctors, our scientists and our doctors, the very people that we have sustained, that we have put through university through, public funding, through funding universities with public money so that they can be educated and that they can serve the public and they can respect the Hippocratic oath, which is to do no harm. These very people, this entire class of doctors and scientists, they have betrayed us too, because many of them are in the know, and they don't say anything because they benefit extraordinarily. They benefit as doctors, they benefit as people in the pharma industry, and so on. So
I mean, we see greed being such a factor here. It almost seems inhuman to me. And, I noticed that I'm not so sure of a turn in your work, but maybe a bit of opening up in the areas of some of these things with the spirituality and so on. And I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts, Kevin, on, the Vatican has come out innumerable times. And I think it should really put things into perspective for the audience and for anybody out there abroad to think about and to look at the series of statements released by the Vatican at your presence there. I mean, that really speaks strongly to your work and this effort within these different agencies and societies to kind of get this ball rolling along. You bring up all these excellent points with, bridging the gap in our economic infrastructure and weaning ourselves off fossil fuels and so on. I mean, of course, these are massive issues that have global ramifications all the way from the top all the way down to the bottom that do take, decades in some instances really to get this thing to a place to where we can kind of restore a sense of balance without having an abrupt change and, potentially a mass die-off of people. We have to be able to do this in a way in which takes some time. I think that's very controversial for some people, and it's difficult for them to wrap their minds around that. But I wanted to touch on, the Vatican and your thoughts on what this might mean as far as it being an inhuman agenda, because when we look at them coming out, these guys own the world's largest telescope out there, and they've come out innumerable times talking about extraterrestrials and stuff. How do you feel, if at all, this has some type of influence in this agenda?
Well, I'm doing two things. I'm looking from today into the past and from today into the future. And as I looked into the past, with my article, The Holy Grail, Controlling Human Life on the Planet, it was so revealing for me to discover that, population control has been with us for a very long time, from very unstructured ways. Like, for instance, the tribal people in the long distant past, where they didn't have enough food, or they had to be on the move, they had to migrate, and they couldn't carry these babies, or they couldn't take these old people along, they had to leave them behind to die. That was a form of population control. And as society grew, from a smaller to a larger unit, one form or another of population control evolved, and I described that in my article, The Holy Grail. And the very interesting thing that I uncovered is also that it is religious figures who have always been in charge of making the decision who is going to be left behind to die, and who is going to be sheltered by the social construct. That has always been a decision left into the hands of the shaman, the priest, the witch doctor. It was always a religious figure, and I've looked at every culture, how they've dealt with this, with population control. And I looked, in the Christian world, for instance, and monasticism was a form of population control, lo and behold. Because as men were fighting and dying in wars and dying in industrial accidents and dying early as it is, because they do the hard work, the women were left alone, were left without husbands, without mates, without the possibility of ever getting married. So and in these days and age, women could not own property, could not work and earn, a living to sustain themselves in a monetary way. So society, what did it do? What did the Christian church do? Well, they found a different solution. They created monasticism, and they put, the women in monasteries, and they inculcated in them, the notion of abstinence, and they kept them, secluded from society, so they would never meet a man, and they would never you make use of the reproductive system. That was a form of population control. And I even traced back, I've even uncovered, evidence that the bubonic plague was used to control the population. That was not always accidental. And I've looked at every culture, and every culture has had a form of population control. But to go back to your question, how far does this go to? And I'm still working on that, by the way, so I don't want to commit myself early on. But it seems that this knowledge, the knowledge that in order for society to thrive, for civilization to evolve, you need to control the population. Why? Because you need to invest in people in order to improve the quality of life, the quality of human being. If you have unrestricted population growth, the quantity will destroy any kind of attempts of improving the quality. You're just catching, it's a catch-22 situation. You're just trying to survive, just trying to keep everybody alive, keep body and soul together. Whereas if you engage in population control and you concentrate the social wealth into fewer people, then you can educate these people well. You can feed them better. You can, they can be stronger and smarter, and they can make greater contributions. And society can have some leisure, some luxury, some comfort. And it's not just the bare brutal survival. So how far did this knowledge go? That is the question. And this is the very secret of civilization. You have to control the population in order to improve, in order to allow civilization to evolve. How far did this knowledge go back to? I've traced it only as far back as the Hebrews, as the Hebrew tribes. Let's say 2000 BC. But I'm working now on very, very interesting article. To trace to try and make sense, of all these evidence of alien life that may have visited planet Earth, and the institutions that may have knowledge of this, and that may carry, the seed of this knowledge to this day, and that part of this knowledge, perhaps the most important part of this knowledge, is this Holy Grail. This Holy Grail being that you have to control human life in order to allow civilization to evolve. And whether it goes back to an alien civilization or not, I cannot commit myself to that yet because I have not looked at the evidence, but it could very well be the case. And so stay put for my work because it continues.
Also, Kevin, when you revealed in your book Revelation that came out after the hunger strike, which basically shared your journey through the hunger strike, you said you had two epiphanies that have come along. Kind of give us some insight on. Was that you kind of knew that you were going to be doing this work at some point, and that was revealed to you? Could you basically touch on that a little bit?
Yes, that's actually a very good question, Kimberlee, because that is the clearest indication that there is some kind of interference, some kind of guidance, that is not of this world. The epiphanies that happened to me, and the listeners have to keep in mind that I am an agnostic person. At the time that the epiphanies happened to me, I was an atheist. Always spiritual, but nevertheless an atheist. Now I'm agnostic with a even stronger spirituality, and I know that there is a higher intelligence, whether you want to call it God or an alien life intelligence. It's there. And these epiphanies that happened to me in 2003, one of them in the Palau Islands, in this extraordinary natural environment that is heaven on earth, and then a few months later at the Iguazu Falls in the south of Brazil, another paradise on earth. These epiphanies characterized all of the religious figures in the past, and the prophets or the saints or the people who have communicated with God or with a higher entity. They all describe the exact same thing, and this is what happened to me too. It happened to me in Palau Islands the first time it happened, and it was such a powerful moment. I'm telling you, for 5 years thereafter, I could not even speak about it without bursting into tears, and I'm a strong person emotionally. In the Palau Islands, what happened is that my deceased father, my dead father, appeared, in a cloud of light in the middle of the night. In this remote part, I was sleeping in my tent. Half of my body was outside of the tent because it was hot. On this remote beach, I had not seen a single human being in a week. I was in this paradise, with a starry sky above my head that it was to die for, and sleeping, soundly. And then all of a sudden, this cloud, this light appeared, and my father, there he was, right there, and it was just scared the bejeebers out of me. He was right there, my dead father. And, by some kind of process, miracle, this kind of light that went deep into the core of my being and passed on this strength and this message, to live on love alone. That was the message. And then the strength that was inserted in me, if you want, to this bolt of light, which is something that all of these epiphanies are characterized by today or in the past. I call it the love light. And this love light gave me this physical strength to weather the battles ahead. And they did not start. The battles did not start until 2009. So I had a 6-year period there in which I married, and I had 2 children, beautiful children, and life went on as usual. But then, I knew that this was going to come because I was told that, through another epiphany at Iguazu Falls, a few months after the epiphany in the Palau Islands, that I'm going to be called upon to change the course of history, of mankind, if you want. And I'm going to be, it came in the form of a metaphor, namely to be the drop of water that changes the course of the river. And it happened, of course, on the side of the river at Iguazu Falls, where you have these massive waterfalls. They're a natural wonder. And was full moon, and the sprinkles from the water vapors and the full moon created a rainbow at night, which is, a natural phenomenon I had never seen before. And this is when that message happened. But these 2 epiphanies changed me to the core, prepared me for what was to come, gave me the strength for what was to come. And this is why I'm alive today, despite of the attacks that I've experienced from every direction. And they have been brutal. And they have been pitiless. I have not slept in my bed in 4 years. I have not seen my children in 4 years. And I was never an indifferent father. I was always, my children are the very core of my being. The very reason that I'm doing this. I love them more than anything else on this earth. But I have not seen them in 4 years, almost 4 years. They've taken away my children. This is one of the things that they've done. And I mention this right now, even though it's very emotional, it's very hard for me to speak about that, because during the epiphany at Iguazu Falls, I was told by this higher intelligence, or this, God, if you want, if you're religious, I was told that if you don't do what you're asked to do, have the strength to change the course of history, I'm going to punish you.
Wow.
By
it's just, wow. Yeah.
Right. For a few minutes, I was given, that feeling. That horrible feeling.
It's not us and who, Kevin. I mean, that's basically the question right now. I feel, we all feel at the depths of our soul that, we are here to do this work right now. And if we don't step up, then who's going to do it?
Yes, let me finish this. I've gotten control of myself. The horrible feeling of what it is like to have your children torn away from you. But the amazing thing is that at that time, I was not even married. My children weren't even born. And nevertheless, I was told, you have 2 children. You're not going to see them if you don't do this. That was the punishment that was in store for me if I wasn't prepared to take on this responsibility. Mm. So how do I explain that? I cannot explain that as a man of science, as an academic, and I'm a very a logical person, as anybody who reads my articles can determine. I rely on empirical data and on scientific data from multiple fields. I'm not an uneducated person, but this cannot be explained. The reason and logic cannot touch this subject, and it happened. I cannot deny that it happened. So many people who are who are dedicated atheists or who want to disbelieve will say, here's evidence Kevin is a lunatic because he had an epiphany. That's just, that's probably just a sign of mental illness. well, these epiphanies happened, and they were more real than anything else that has happened in my life, except the birth of my children, perhaps. They happened, and I cannot deny them, and for me to deny them would be completely hypocritical. So I know there is a higher entity out there. I know there is a God, or there is an alien life form, if you want, who is far more intelligent than we are, and who are delegating us towards something. And what they're delegating us towards is for us as a species to develop a consciousness, to develop a consciousness that puts the well-being of the species ahead of the well-being of a single individual. And that is what our entire civilization has been about. That is what every organization of every institution, whether it's a religious institution in the past or a secular one today, they're all building towards this. Yes. Sorry, you were going to ask something?
No.
Oh. So they're all building towards this, the development of a collective consciousness. Because only if we have a collective consciousness, a global consciousness, can we now make personal sacrifices, for the common good, for our children, for our children's children, so for future generations. So now we're only by virtue of this collective consciousness can we think and act not only with respect to what is good for us as individuals and what is good for society today, but what is good for our children in the future and our children's children, for the species, for the planet, and for all other life forms on Earth. So we can no longer think about just ourselves and our society and our city and our economic well-being in the here and now. We have to think about planetary well-being and about the future of this planet and the future of life on this planet. And for that, we need a collective consciousness, and we have to act and we have to think according to this collective consciousness, which is still evolving within each and every one of us. So, but to bring you back now to solutions, as part of this process of evolution for me and for everybody else, because I'm just one human being out of 7 billion human beings, and we're all going through this process, but we're just at different levels, if you want, of absorbing or being incorporated into this collective consciousness. One of my concrete solutions for the problems we face here and now, in order to reflect, this connection consciousness, is that we have to have a planetary security prerogative. That is, population control and resource sharing, these two things, which are preserving us from war and from brutality and from poverty and from disaster. These have to be declared planetary security prerogatives. And we have to empower each and every human being to understand why we all need to sacrifice for these two planetary security prerogatives, population control and resource sharing, which means nation states make no sense anymore because they stand in the way of these resource sharing. They stand in the way of making common sacrifices and helping each other across national borders. They stand in the way of eradicating poverty and the differences in wealth and in well-being between nations. They stand in the way of homogenizing wealth. And because we've developed, as societies, as economies separately, and in the West we're so far ahead of other countries, and they'll never catch up with us unless we're willing to help them catch up, or we're willing to stall our development in order to focus our resources so that the others can catch up with us. And all of these things are happening now all at once. But right now, we're running out of time. So we need these two issues, population control and resource sharing, to be declared planetary security prerogatives. We need a new body. Let's say, I call it the Council of 12. A new body of, let's say, 12 individuals who can sit at the top of the United Nations, because the United Nations cannot be trusted anymore. They've lost our trust. They've been poisoning us for 7 decades now in secret, and they've been acting in secret, and they've been encouraging, this society of deception and lies, and they've broken our trust, and they can no longer be trusted. But we can't dissolve them either. We need to control them. So we need a body at the top of the United Nations who can dictate and control every existing United Nations organization. This body of 12 is in charge, is the brain of the world to coordinate and to openly and transparently tell everybody on Earth what they have to do and why they have to do it, and give them the means necessary to do it. So that we can control population growth, we can depopulate to the extent that we become sustainable as a civilization, and we can share resources so that there will be no more, people starving in parts of the world and others lavishing in unimaginable wealth. Because this is evil. This is what is evil. To have billionaires and starving people. That is evil. That is what evil looks like today on Earth. It exists. It's here. It's in this difference between billionaires and starving people in Africa or elsewhere.
Yeah, completely out of balance. Now, is that this body of 12? Is that something is that part of the conversation that you're having with the 196 heads of state?
Yes, I'm for the past 30 or 40 letters, I've mentioned that in each and every one of them, and I call it a planetary security prerogative. And I've also mentioned that to NATO, because NATO has communicated with me indirectly through one of their events online, and they opened the subject of demographics. This is they use language that is euphemistic and that hides all of the things, but people in the know. And they wanted to know what's my solution? What do I suggest? What should they do? And I said, this is what you need to do. You need to have a planetary security prerogative that. And in terms of population, you have to give, first of all, we have to ensure that every country and every individual on Earth respects this replacement level fertility. That is, no couple on Earth can have more than 2 children, so that so the population is stabilized. It neither grows nor decreases. But we need to be a little bit more strict, so it decreases gradually and very slowly. In any case, if we have a replacement level fertility, 2 children per woman, we'll still be decreasing slowly once we accomplish this goal. So this is one aspect of this planetary security prerogative: replacement level fertility across the globe as a personal and as a national responsibility towards the international community, towards the future of the planet, towards all other life forms on Earth. Then we need the right of people to terminate their lives if they need to, let's say, rather than prolonging life artificially in hospitals by keeping people hooked up to machines and keeping them in a vegetative state for years and years, or people who are chronically ill and who don't want to live, and they're screaming for mercy, and you have all these organizations that prohibit assisted suicide, or so that the individual has the right to terminate his or her life whenever he or she needs to terminate his life, if that's what the circumstances dictate. That's another aspect of this planetary security prerogative. And these are the kinds of hard decisions that we all have to be familiar with now, and the kind of sacrifices that we're all going to have to make from this point onward, because it is clear that the population can no longer be allowed to grow. It is clear that there is no such thing. We can never accomplish sustainability. We can never save, our skins and this planet unless we bring the population to a halt. And until such time as we bring the population to a halt, we cannot decarbonize either. We cannot stop polluting the Earth, because first of all, we are already extracting more than 50%. We're already using more than 50% of the land mass. We're already using every natural known method of extracting energy, like hydro energy, for instance. In many countries, it's completely overabused, like Canada, and we're destroying, fish life in the rivers. So even though it's a renewable energy, hydro energy, it still has devastating environmental consequences. Nothing is truly for free, not even the solar and not even wind. There's still environmental consequences even from these non-carbon emitting energy sources. There's always going to be. And if we're going to bring, the standard of living of the remaining 6 billion people on this earth to that of the 1 billion that live in the developed world, that means that between now and 2050, when there will be 9 or 10 billion people on the planet trying to have the same standard of living as us, we would have to increase the energy production tenfold. Imagine the kind of damage we're doing right now, pumping, smoke and smog and pollutants and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. At just 1/10 of what would be required 50 years from now or 40 years from now, if everybody else were to have the kind of energy consumption that we do. Many of the solutions that are proposed right now to reduce carbon and to use existing resources and technology, which is the carbon capture and sequestration idea. That is, instead of allowing smoke, the smog, all these greenhouse gases to go into the atmosphere, we redirect them into a hole in the ground, into a deep underground mine or pit. And of course, this is just, it's easier said than done. It hasn't been done yet. And nobody knows whether it can be done. But that's one of the solutions, and it's still in its infancy, the technology. We don't know if it's going to work, if it's even feasible. And many countries that have proposed shifting, from a carbon-emitting energy grid to one that is completely carbon-free, they still have a component of the energy production in the future relying on this technology that has never been tried or used, of this carbon capture and sequestration. And speaking of that, right now, in order to buy us time, we have the chemtrails. The chemtrails that those of us with eyes and with a brain on our shoulders, we see them above our heads, throughout NATO countries, almost every day in some areas and some parts of the globe. This is a form of limiting the climate, the warming of the planet. So they're spraying all these aluminum particles into the air to create an albedo effect. That is a reflective effect. They're creating these artificial clouds to reflect some of the solar light so it doesn't come into the atmosphere and warms up the Earth, to compensate for all the greenhouse gases that we pump into the atmosphere and that are increasing the temperature because they're trapping the heat. So we're trying to do desperate things right now, but as they're trying to do this, they're tackling the problem with a coldness that is a military heartlessness, because they figure, well, it's people that produce all these greenhouse gases, right? We don't yet have the technology necessary to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to what is needed, which is 1.6 ton per person per year. So we're going to buy us time, but while we are creating these albedo clouds in order to offset, the warming of the climate through our greenhouse gas emissions, let's just also make sure that we poison the population so that they, many of them will die. They'll die sooner, and that way there'll be fewer people creating, greenhouse gases. Therefore, we tackle the problem from both ends. And this is what every solution that is in use right now, that derives from the global governance level and that needs to tackle both of these things, depopulation and decarbonation, is dual use. They depopulate and decarbonate at the same time. So human life has become completely irrelevant in the process. It's the same with GMOs. We feed the hungry, but we also sterilize them at the same time. They're doing one good thing and they're doing one evil thing, because this is what we need. This is where the Earth needs to go. Where the human civilization needs to go. They need to balance life and death. Life, births, and deaths have to be equal. That is how you stabilize the population. So they're trying to engineer this equality, right, between births and deaths. So if in some countries they cannot limit births, well, they're going to increase the death. In countries where they can, where they already they can limit birth, they don't have to increase the death. They just have to make sure they do whatever it takes in order to keep those two in balance, because that is how you stabilize the population. But now, in addition to that, to this demographic prerogative, now they have the environmental prerogative. There are too many people already here. So how do we get rid of the existing people? This is what they're doing, and they're employing this covert war method. They're waging war on us through our food, through our water, through our beverages, through our packaging, through our ministries of health, and now through the friggin' air too, by spraying these poisons on our heads. while at the same time creating albedo clouds in order to combat global warming. Can you imagine being in the shoes of these people and making decisions that condemned billions to death, to a slow death, yes, but nevertheless to a death? Because shutting down people's fertility means you're shutting down that genetic line for good. Nobody's going to bring that genetic line back. If a couple cannot have children, that couple is as dead as a dead tree.
Yes, and if you can control the weather of a population, you can therefore control the amount of people within that society. And there are different ways and techniques they use, geoengineering, chemtrails, to control populations. I believe they also use it to kill off a large amount of populations. There's a Royal Society 98-page document they came out with called Geoengineering the Climate. And that is in 2009, but this weather manipulation goes back to 1947, a document that I've uncovered from the Geophysical Research papers, Joint Air Force Weather Bureau cloud seeding trials conducted during winter and spring 1949. So wanting to control the weather as a means of population control and for militaristic use goes back to the 40s. And, that's weather control and manipulation. And if you're getting the military involved in weather manipulation, then definitely it is a war-style tactic. And we in the United States, anywhere, if you're being sprayed, they have declared war on you.
Yeah, breathing. We all have to breathe, so there you go. I wanted to bring up something else, Kevin. Are you familiar with the Georgia Guidestones?
Yes, I am. But let me just address Eugene's thing for a second. Because these technologies dovetail, and they dovetail in very, very complex ways. And let me just give you an example. Okay, I've mentioned the chemtrails. They create albedo clouds in order to slow down global warming, but they spray aluminum particles on us and sulfates. Why? To increase the presence of heavy metals in the ground and in our water. Why? Because the aluminum binds with fluoride, and it is a far more potent sterilizer than just fluoride alone. One the consequence. Two, the aluminum and the heavy metals in the soils prevent the growth of regular crops, so they force farmers to plant aluminum-resistant GMO crops. So that way they force people to become food dependent, right? So this is how the chemtrails interact or dovetail with the GMOs, because they need the GMOs for several reasons. One of them, if they control the seeds, they control the food, they can dictate how this food is distributed, for one thing, which could be a good thing, but they can also control whether somebody will receive or a group will receive this food that is needed or not. Also, if you control the seeds, you can control the quality of that seed. So they can fiddle and diddle with these GMO seeds to be, for instance, very, very sensitive to drought. And if they want to get rid of a certain population from a certain area for a specific reason, they can just give them seeds that are sensitive to drought, knowing that these people or this area suffers from drought. And if the drought doesn't come, they can use their HARP technology, if indeed it exists, in order to create drought conditions in that area so that the seeds fail, the crops fail, and the people starve to death. And bingo, you have a depopulation effort right there. So, but this is just one example of how these technologies interact and dovetail. They dovetail in many, many ways, and I describe that in my article, Depopulation and Decarbonization. And I just scratched the surface. In fact, I'm sure that they have some other endocrine disruptors that I have yet to discover that they're being used, that I may or may not know about them, but I've certainly discovered, their main methods. So the fact remains that when they change, let's say they give up the use of fluoride, right, as they have done in many countries because of my work and our work, or as Italy has done recently, they've abolished the use of the flu vaccine because, by the way, that's another reaction of the Vatican. Within 2 weeks of the publication of my article, Depopulation, Decarbonization, when I describe how vaccines are used in the developed world in order to speed up the death of the baby boom generation, the Vatican reacted immediately. Immediately, they instructed the Italian government to stop the flu vaccines, and they took the flu vaccines out of out of circulation. That's a direct consequence of our work, of my work. There's just one of them. But yes, these things interact, they dovetail. And if we shut down one method, okay, they're going to replace it with another. Until such time as they bring the depopulation effort into the open, we know that they continue by 1, 2, 3, 4, or some other covert methods. How many of them is anybody's guess? So all of these victories are just temporary victories. They mean absolutely nothing in the order of things because we're not safe. The only time you know they will have abandoned covert methods is when they come out into the open and say, "We need your help." Everybody needs to contribute, needs to restrict, their sexual activity, or needs to make sure they wear condoms, or you use your method of choice for contraception, so that nobody can have more than 2 children. And that's the replacement level fertility. And once you've reached that, and if you don't want to, use temporary methods, then you can get sterilized. But that's going to be a person's choice, an individual's choice of what method they use. And it's going to be safe methods that we're going to be able to use rather than be poisoned through the basic elements of life. But until such time as they declare depopulation a planetary security prerogative, and they empower us all to respect this as a law, as a security precaution for the survival of the species and of this planet, we know they're continuing via covert methods. They cannot be. Why? Because they cannot abandon. Once they take the foot off the brake in terms of population control or subverting human fertility, what would happen is that the fertility will revert to its natural levels, and the population then will double every 20 or 30 years. And we can't survive that. We can't do that. 7 billion becoming 14 billion will never survive this doubling. Not a chance in hell will we survive this doubling. And that doubling would happen in 30 years. 30 years is nothing in historical terms. Nothing. It is just a moment in time.
Yeah, we will not last unless we completely do away with our old industrial civilization and plant farms on what used to be cities. But that was Bobby. This is me, Bobby, with that last statement. I think he got me mixed up with Eugene. But
sorry. Yes, there was one other question that you were going to ask.
I had mentioned the Georgia Guidestone, how they had,
Yes, I do. I know the Georgia Guidestones, and what they are is the ideal that the people who have knowledge, intimate knowledge of this depopulation program would like to see, in order to bring civilization in harmony with nature. So they say there that their ideal population, according to them, is 500 million. But I am certain that even with today's technology, if we switch to renewables, to a great extent, we can support a 3 billion, not in perpetuity, because 3 billion will still damage the fabric of life and the biotopes on this planet with the existing technology. So, assuming that we're not going to discover better technology or conceive or create better technology, 3 billion would be too much. We'll have to go down to probably 1 billion or at most 2. But this is how many people will be able to live on the planet and without destroying the planet and without destroying all other life forms on the planet, because now we're going to a 6th extinction with, killing other species by the day, and by the year, every year, I don't know how many thousands are dying, or tens of thousands, from microbes up to, to quadrupeds. But this is an ideal. They say, as far as they're concerned, that would certainly 500 million would be, a breeze for the Earth. The Earth could put up with 500 million of us, even if we're continuing with our dirty and damaging lifestyle and economy and industry. And yes, that's what they're trying to represent with the Georgia Guidestones. The ideal that we should be striving towards. And I have no problem with the ideal. What I have a problem with is that we have been excluded from even, from being included in the circle of well-being. We have, they've decided that they're going to poison us slowly into extinction, and they can inherit the Earth. Well, isn't that cozy? Isn't that grand for them and terrible for us? We're not going to let them do that. And the thing is that, by poisoning us slowly for 6 generations, they've degraded the intellectual endowment of the species to such an extent that now, for instance, China produces 3 times more geniuses than the Western world. And of course, that was not the case before. Otherwise, our supremacy in science and technology would have never happened. They've degraded us to such an extent that now we are, far inferior in intelligence to the Chinese. And the Chinese, of course, they are far ahead of us because they are the only they and the Vietnamese, they are the only countries that have refused to poison their populations, and instead they've legislated. They passed the one-child law, and that's it. Every couple has to respect that, and that's that. So they don't need to poison the people. The same, Vietnam has done the same thing, and lo and behold, because these 2 countries have proceeded in this fashion through legislation rather than through covert poisoning or through coerced surgical sterilization like India, which is better than the West, but still not as good as China's method. Now their kids are the smartest. So you have these PISA tests, for education to see how the children score across the world. And guess who scores the best? Well, it's the Chinese and the Vietnamese. Number 1, China. Number 2, Vietnam. Because they legislated population control, whereas we have been poisoned into stupidity and sterility and feebleness and feeble-mindedness and ill health for the past 7 decades. And with each generation, we become dumber and fatter and feebler and more dependent and less able to act. That is how devastating this is. What nature has fought to create over millennia of evolution, we are destroying in just 2, 3, 4 generations because we're too stupid and too incapable to agree that we have to control population and we have to to live differently or live to such an extent that nature can put up with us, that nature can fix the damage we do to its biotopes. Well, that has come to an end.
I'm just saying that we definitely have come to the conclusion that the model that is currently in place is severely broken, and it is not in the best interest of anyone. And it makes me feel empowered to know that we can have these conversations right now with all these 196 heads of state, saying, we need a new model, we need a new body above those who have proven that they are not doing things for our best interest. And the time is now. And, we're going to get you in front of these 196 heads of state. And you already have 3 in Africa that are going to sit down with you.
Yes, one of the invitations came directly from the president through Facebook. And he said, anytime, Kevin, anytime you want to come. The second one is still tapping to see where I stand, but it's also through direct communication. And I'm certain that an invitation direct invitation will come very soon. And the third and the fourth now, there's a fourth now, by the way. The presidents are communicating with me indirectly through people high up in the government, and it is very interesting because in one of these countries, and by the way, the reason I'm not mentioning the names of the countries is because I don't want the censors to interfere and to stop these by applying pressure on these countries and on these presidents, which they can very well do. So I'm not saying anything until I'm on the territories of these countries, and I have spoken with these heads of state, and then I can say, this is what has happened, and this is who invited me, and this is what we have discussed. But the third and the fourth one, yes, they are communicating with me through high-ranking officials, and one of them, by the way, the Catholic Church is helping along. Is right there in the middle through the Conference of Bishops. So, the Catholic Church appears that it's trying to, to facilitate this. I'm hoping that it is a genuine attempt and not a fake attempt, because that is possible too. We will not know until it happens. But I always give people and organizations and states the benefit of the doubt, because when you are doing this kind of work and have been subjected to this kind of attacks, this kind of vile and vicious attacks, the tendency is to develop, a system of self-defense where you would be suspicious of everything and everyone. But I don't want to allow myself to adopt this kind of mentality, because then I will have lost the battle and then the system will have won. This is exactly what they want. They want us to be suspicious of each other. They want us not to be able to coalesce and agree and come up with a viable alternative, because they're committed to this plan of genocide, of global genocide, and they don't want to change course, because they've all committed mass murder on a scale that makes Hitler look like a babysitter, and they're afraid that if things change, if the leadership changes and the course changes, then heads are going to fall. They don't trust us. They think about us the way they evaluate themselves. They know they're criminals, and they think that we are going to act like criminals, but we are better than they are. Why? We have to be better than they are. And why? Well, let's say that the system does change, and we're going to call people to account. Somebody has to be responsible for this. What do? Do we put them in front of a firing squad and shoot the leaders? Of course, purely judicial or legal terms, that is the punishment for genocide and crimes against humanity. But we can't do that. Why? Because these people actually have saved us from worse. Whether we like to admit that or not, they have saved us from worse. And we have to recognize this. They've committed, horrible crimes to save us from worse, from nuclear annihilation and mass starvation and environmental devastation, because they could not forge consensus in order to engage the entire society. So we have to recognize, we have to forgive, we have to forget, we have to call them to account, to spill out the beans and tell us the truth, the entire truth. Otherwise, there can be no change without the truth and no empowerment. We have to go through a period of reconciliation, the way South Africa went after the apartheid system was taken out of commission. And that we're going to have to force them to do that, because it doesn't appear that anybody in the system has the courage. I don't see that courage, not even in President Obama, who, the United States is always entrusted to be the leader in the world. As much as I like President Obama, and he's a very decent fellow, a very decent human being, there's no doubt about it. But we need right now, we need a pope that is more than just decent. We need a president of the United States that is more than just decent. We need true heroes. We need people with true courage who can stand up in front of the world and say it as it is and knock sense into everybody, whether that person is, religious, educated or uneducated, agnostic or whatever, communist or capitalist. All these differences are, as the Germans say, wurscht. They don't matter an iota. They're completely unimportant in light of the problems we face. So we need leaders to stand up and tell us the truth. And since there is no single one out there who has the guts to do that, what I suggest is that they all get together. If they can't say it single, then perhaps they muster the courage to say it as a group, all 196 of them. Let them stand there in front of the world and tell us the truth together and say, this is what we've inherited. We have inherited this system. We didn't create this system. We are the third, fourth, fifth generation. But this system cannot continue. If this system continues, what is left at the end is not worth having. And we need leaders now. We don't need bureaucrats and technocrats. And we don't have leaders. All we have is bureaucrats and technocrats. No leaders. And those leaders who come out, from among the masses are being shut down, being driven back down, pounded to hell like they've done to me, because they're afraid. They're afraid of true leaders. They're afraid of true change. They're afraid of change because they know what they've done is absolutely without precedent in history. That's where we're at.
Well, we need, and what we'd like to see, and what we're going to focus on here going forward is, at this point, the cat's out of the bag. I mean, we are sharing it with the world, and we are calling them to stand up and take the courage to step forward And we're creating a platform or a model where they can do so. And I agree with you. I don't believe that it does anyone any good to, shoot someone for crimes that they've inherited. But, we do have to have a call to action where they come together and say, yes, this is being done. This is why we had to do it. We've inherited it. But this is what we're going to do to be part of the solution, to create a new model. And this is never going to occur again. We have a checks and balances. People take full accountability for their decision-making and not relying on a system to dictate, what we can or cannot do. We should be all having the same conversation. Everybody is responsible for this. All of our decisions we need to be fully accountable for. Stop pointing fingers at somebody else and everybody take responsibility. Leaders from the top to the bottom and everything in between. That's the conversation that needs to be had. And people need to wake up and stop watching their non-reality television and actually, get involved in being part of the solution. And everybody's just been, the apathy, and people don't even care. They don't know that, their children's children are being slated for, to not even exist. Everything that we do here is focused on the people, the children that aren't even born, that don't even have a voice yet. But if we don't act now, that they won't have a future. I just want to let you guys know we got about 8 minutes. So if you want, Eugene, if you had any specific questions that you hadn't had a chance to put out there, I want to make sure we have time to cover it.
Well, thanks for that, Kim. I do have a couple of comments, and maybe I'll get some questions in there. I just want to touch on it. There's so many different controversial aspects of what we've been talking about here today. When we hear something like, for example, we know that Obama is a great individual on this, and we look at the foreign policy, so many people out there would immediately have a problem with that. So many people would immediately have a problem with, you can only have 2 children, and that's the way to go. And what people don't realize is that these things are being waged against us covertly, and to put the power of the people, the power to make these decisions back in the people's hands, Kevin, is something that really resonates with me. And I see a lot of people in the younger generations coming up now, throughout their 20s especially, and even younger than that, seeing the sickness in the world and wanting to not have that child, to not bring another child into that world and all this kind of stuff. And so that is kind of taking root. And if there's going to be a depopulation policy in order to help restore balance or to keep things from getting out of control, it would be ideal to have it as a choice that we could make personally and to educate ourselves about that. And it's so hard when we look at people that are locked into these agendas and we want to castigate these people. We want to judge these people. And it just becomes so difficult when we don't have forgiveness towards these things. And it's not right to go and shoot these guys. Of course, there's a lot of us out there that would like to do something like that because you see that these guys have been responsible for the deaths of all these people. It's just such a quagmire. It's just such a really difficult situation for us to be able to reckon. And it's this multi-generational deal. And the magnitude of the things that we're talking about here today, I think, are difficult, and they're certainly in accordance with many of the issues that we deal with at calltoactions.com and yourself, Kevin, and all of the people that we work with. The magnitude is so great that it's difficult for people to begin to wrap their minds around this. And if we just stop and think about it for a little bit, and we get back to the core principles of what being a human is all about, we know that we're not going to continue to make headway in our lives and our situations if we continue to sit there and not have accountability and we point fingers at everybody else. That's something that we learn when we're children, hopefully. And to just apply these real simplistic, basic human things to these types of situations, in my opinion, would have a very profound effect. And to see just simply forgiveness, Kevin. I mean, it's such an important aspect of all of this for people to understand and to understand, to put ourselves in these people's shoes. What do? You're sitting in the White House, for example, and you're locked into all these foreign policies. You've got a bunch of banks out there who are worried about their money and their fingers are into damn everything. It's a really tricky game when you get out here into these politics and all this kind of stuff. And I can assure the public that there are people that have been locked into these agendas that are screaming for a way to get out of this stuff. And that is the reasons that we are here today. They're the reasons that we're even allowed to talk about these things, is because people aren't having it anymore. And it is a very complicated issue to get these things done without having a mass die-off or some type of cataclysmic event. And so I'm not really sure what I would ask you, Kevin, other than how do you see people accepting this, and what can we do to further that as far as just the acceptance of the things that we've been talking about here today?
People have to understand that this system came into being as a substitute to war, to preserve us from, the horrible, the devastation of killing each other in the trenches or shooting, throwing bombs at each other. It is such a huge step forward, such a far more civilized way for nations and people to coexist. And this is truly, the achievement for the most part of the American people. They have replaced a system of war. The European system was based on, the strongest takes whatever he wants, and that's it. That's why the Europeans went invading everywhere, colonized everybody, stole, and abused and violated all other nations on Earth. Well, the Americans set into place a system that is far more civilized and that demands self-control and sacrifices from each and every nation. And this is what the depopulation program is about. It's a step forward in our civilization. But now the next step forward is we cannot possibly say, okay, well, these people have been poisoning us as a substitute to war. Yeah, that's fine, but they've been poisoning us. Yes. And if we start, shooting and blaming and these people, then we're going back to what we've been rescued from. We're going back to the European system of the strongest wins, and we're going to be killing each other because where do you draw the line? Who's responsible, who's not responsible? We're all responsible to a certain extent, even those who are apathetic. We're responsible through our apathy, through our lack of involvement, through our refusal to open our eyes and do our part. So we can't. We have to thank them, actually, for what they've done. As hard as it is, even I, they destroyed my life, and I have not seen my children for 4 years, and I still have to actually thank them, because in the grand scheme of things, they have ensured that my generation, that your generation, and our children's generation will not experience a world war like my parents and grandparents. Like our grandparents have experienced 2 world wars. We're the first generation ever who has not experienced that kind of conflict. There have been, skirmishes and little wars here and there. And this is something that we have these people, the depopulation is to thank. And we have to understand that once you look at the world, through the prism of global policymakers and these vast problems, trying to keep 7 billion people from each other's throats and 196 nations from trying to keep them honest and keep them out of each other's territories. It takes a big stick to do that, and the Americans have done it as gently as possibly can be done. Nevertheless, there have been many people and many leaders who have been so unwieldy, if you want, and so backwards, they have to be punished severely. But even the most brutal American actions, compared to the past, compared to the European behavior prior to the 1945, is a vast improvement. And for us to go back to that kind of brutality and retribution is terrible. So this is where our religious values and our ability to forgive and forget and to understand, we're going to have to depend on that so much. Whether you're religious or not, you're going to have to dig into that as your cultural endowment. And as I said, I'm not religious. I'm religious.
We've got about 30 seconds. I just want to let everybody know that we're going to have a link up for the GoFundMe page so we can get Kevin in front of these 196 heads of state. And just want to thank you, Kevin, for everything that you've done. We're going to do more shows. This is just to get it out there with an update on what we've done so far, where we are today, and where we're going. And we've got about just about 10 seconds, and the show's going to shut down here. So I just want to thank everybody for listening, Kevin, and we will stay in touch daily on where we're going from here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kimberlee, Gene, Bobby. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure being on your show, and thank you for giving me the opportunity and for all the help.
Very much a pleasure having you on the show.
Are we off air now?